Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement interview, powered by SIG, and I'm your host, Philip Eidson. And today's show is part of a mini-series of 6 different episodes that I recorded all live at the recent SIG Fall Summit. And this being a live recording, you'll be sure to hear some background noises from baristas making coffee to venue employees taping wire to the carpet. Lots of different little noises in between. We actually had a booth set up in the main corridor of the conference venue, so you're sure to get the atmosphere from the event from those interviews. And so for this mini-series, I'm actually going to jump straight into the conversation. You'll hear me introduce the guest as we get going with the conversation. So with that being said, let's roll the tape. So hi there, everybody, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement interview. I'm actually here at the SIG Fall Conference here in Carlsbad, and I'm delighted to be joined by Alan Holland. Alan is founder and CEO of Keelvar. So Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Philip.
You have a fascinating background. You have a degree in computer engineering, I think a PhD in artificial intelligence. You've worked as a research fellow and a lecturer. So you're probably the best qualified person that I've interviewed to actually answer this question. And that is, what really is AI?
So AI, this is a question I'm asked increasingly often now. What is AI? And there's not an easy or concise description because it's a broad family of technologies. It's essentially software trying to replicate intelligent human decision making in various aspects, and it's divided into areas such as machine learning, where you're trying to understand patterns and make inference, but it's also search, where you might be looking for the optimal way to combine things. It might be scheduling your day, scheduling a workforce, choosing a path from A to B, or choosing the optimal combination of awards in a sourcing event. So there's also machine vision and other areas of artificial intelligence that are all they're all improving, and many of those technologies have reached a stage where they're present in some of your apps in your phone, and people are starting to join the dots and say, well, if we could increase our level of intelligence over here and combine it to solve this problem, then the level of innovation around AI is increasing rapidly. It's not that AI has made any massive advances in the last 2 or 3 years. It's just that people are starting to join the dots between various subsystems in AI and come up with applications that, when you take these pieces and put them together, you've got an overall system that's extremely powerful.
Interesting. So you talked about, and there's nothing really that's changed over the last 2 or 3 years. When you go back, a broader time horizon, what's changed over the last 15 years that you've been involved in AI?
This is interesting because when I was a PhD student over 12, 13 years ago, I sat down and I met with a guy called David Walls. He's a very famous AI researcher from Columbia University. And he told me about the history. This guy was in his 60s and he's saying, the history of AI has been a long and interesting road. And it started in the 60s and it went through phases where there was hype. Yep. And then there's AI winter, and then there's more hype, and AI winter, and
it's like a cycle that repeats itself.
Absolutely. And so what he said was that, and this is back in maybe 2003, 2004. It was enjoying a lot of hype again at the time, but it went through a lull, and now it's increasing again. But I would say the difference this time around is that with mobile devices in everybody's hands, that when you develop an intelligent application now, there's so many more people to sell it to, that there's a greater incentive among software companies to actually build intelligence into their applications and wow customers. So and people are seeing it in their consumer B2C apps. So now they're starting to expect it in their B2B apps.
Right. Now that's interesting, because when I think about the future of procurement as well, and you look at, and we always cite Amazon as an example, but it's really just a proxy for our lives have become very much easier in how we buy in our home lives, and so we start to expect that in our business lives, and it seems like it's taking a little while to catch up. But once the cat's out of the bag, so to speak, it's only a matter of time. So it's interesting that now more and more people are seeing AI. Maybe they don't even know that it is AI, but they're seeing the opportunity of what they can do in their personal lives on the apps.
Exactly, yes. And so their level of expectations is increasing. And they're just demanding higher standards, which is good for everybody.
Right. What was your research on as a research fellow?
So my topic was actually called, my PhD was on the topic of risk management for combinatorial auctions. So, what's a combinatorial auction? It'll be your next question, Philip.
You're asking it for me.
So, in effect, right, so there was, if you think back to the spectrum auctions, when governments were selling telecom spectrum 15 years ago, there was a realization at the time that if you break it down into many small bands and allow the telecoms companies to bid on contiguous bands, they could, and bid on various regions, that you could optimize revenue by allowing them combine the areas of spectrum they wanted, so that they could optimize the locations of masts, so they could minimize the number of masts, and they could optimize for where their marketing presence was strongest, and so on and so forth. So there was a realization when the revenues came in from these auctions, they were hugely in excess of what was expected, and massive contrast to the standard auctions formats that were used previously. So there's a sudden realization that the most efficient way to trade with anybody on a reverse or forward auction context is to actually allow the bidders greater freedom of expression. So you start breaking down what it is, and in a procurement context is breaking down what you're doing, what you're buying, into smaller, be it regional units or line items or trade lanes.
It's like unbundling,
because the market knows how to bundle better than you do. They have more information. They all have what we call asymmetric economies of scale too. So they don't want to bundle different things. They want to fit your demand into their existing capabilities or networks.
And that's a lower cost for them to serve, which allows them to be either more profitable or there's more margin to play with.
So you're helping them reduce their costs, their operational costs, so that they can lower the bid for you, so that there can be win-win. So they can actually increase their margins and you reduce your costs. So it's much more progressive form of engaging and with your supply base, because you're trying to find synergies.
Are there certain types of category or product or service that this is better aligned for, that you, when you looked at your findings, or can it be really applied to almost anything?
It can be applied in any setting where you'd consider blending two or more suppliers together, and you're not sure which way to combine them. That's in its most basic form. That's what sourcing optimization is. It's finding the right blend, and even if you were considering a sole supplier outcome, it's still better, right? Why is it still better? It's because when you run the bid process, you're allowing a combination of small vendors compete against bigger vendors. So the game theoretic behavior changes. So the bigger guys realize this is a more competitive setting, so they change their behavior. And it's a way of helping prevent monopolies or oligopolies. So, and if you're smart about things, you'll actually deliberately go for dual or multi-supplier outcomes anyway, because you want more robustness and you want alternatives, so that if something goes wrong, you have fallback. So it's sensible in many ways to apply this strategy. Now, in practice, we see it used in certain categories more than others, like transportation, packaging, MRO. But the reason it's used more in these categories tends to be out of the sheer operational difficulties people have with running sourcing events of a large scale.
Yeah, and complex, sort of have multiple decision factors and analysis that go into it.
Or that the supply base simply refuses to bid in aggregate, or explains, such as in transportation, they have to explain that they're not interested in all your lanes. If they want all their lanes, their utilization factor on their ships or trucks or whatever would drop drastically, and they'd go out of business pretty quickly if they were trying to actually transport all your goods rather than subcontracting and so on. So
yeah, it reminds me of back in my early days in my career. I was in the automotive business. I bought light bulbs. You think automotive light bulbs, it's not that interesting of a category. We only had 3 suppliers in the market, and you had people wanting to fill up production lines for certain bulbs. They weren't interested in other bulbs. You were basically playing them all off against each other to try and find the things that they wanted and leverage that against the things that they didn't really want but nobody wanted. Yeah. So at least you weren't stuck with some bulbs that you had to buy at much higher cost because they just weren't desirable.
Yeah.
And the effort that went into something like that was kind of crazy, and figuring it all out behind the scenes. And it sounds like by using AI, that kind of, it takes care of all the different complexities of something like that.
And what you'll see is that some people are fearful that there's some, let's say, take your example, light bulbs, that nobody wants certain light bulbs, right? Well, people want the light bulbs if the price floats up.
Yeah.
They just don't want the light bulbs at the price here. You want
to buy it at,
right? So what you should do is actually get those market signals. Because all you're doing is you're redistributing costs from other light bulbs to the marginal ones nobody wants, right? So they're reducing the prices on that just to keep you happy, but the prices of others are floating up. So what you should do is encourage price discovery to understand which light bulbs do we need to design out of a car in the next model.
Yeah.
So
because they're not desirable for anyone in the marketplace to sell you.
Yeah. What you're asking for is actually kind of the market, the supply base doesn't want to provide it because it's just expensive. And your customers pay for it in the end. Then.
So how did you make the leap then from academia to then starting your own business? Because it's not necessarily a typical path to take.
No, it's far from it. In fact, somebody from a former university said, I think I'm the only one out of the computer science department in University College Cork to have done this. So it's I guess whilst I was in university and I was working as a research fellow and a lecturer in AI after I finished the PhD, but I had companies coming to me saying, could you help us with, because we rolled out some examples that were very successful in categories like fleet and so on, and they came back and said, could you do this for fuel distribution, for stationery, for this, for that? And I said, yeah, sure, okay. And it started to take over my day job. So I directed them towards other sourcing optimization tools, but they came back and said, could you use the tools for me? Because we don't know how to use them. So I felt there's a gap in the market for tools that were easier to use. Because really, it's not that difficult to run a sourcing optimization project. It's more of a change in mindset.
Yeah.
Disaggregating what you're buying and listing it, and then inviting package bids with discount structures and inviting capacity constraints, and then the software does the rest for you. Really, it's one-click evaluation. And you don't like it, this outcome, too many suppliers. Okay, reduce the number of suppliers.
Change the parameters. And
there you've got all your outcomes. It's very quick. It reduces the workload considerably. So my feeling was this doesn't have to be difficult, and sourcing optimization should be the default. It should be the automatic choice, because it will always fare better than an ordinary sourcing methodology. So it should be sticky. Once people try it, they should never go back. And we've never lost a customer, so that's kind of proof of that, I suppose.
It's kind of convincing people in the first place that this is a different way, but this is perhaps a way that brings benefits over what they've done before, and getting over some of those fears.
Exactly, and I think it's initial fears. Fear of the unknown is probably the greatest obstacle to overcome. And the sense that, this is something very sophisticated and advanced, because it used to be the case that it used to cost $50,000 to $100,000 per project. So people felt, oh, this can't go near that. That's for the $100 million plus projects. My $2 million project.
There's no ROI on doing it like this.
Yeah. So what I suppose that created a fear. Now it doesn't cost that much anymore, obviously, but still that perception can still exist.
How do you get people over that hurdle then? Is it all about just trying to put something like, a sourcing optimization tool in their hands so they could actually see it, and doing that as easily, as seamlessly as possible?
Being very transparent and transparent in every aspect. So having demo videos online, they're publicly accessible. Having support portal with release notes and user guides is publicly accessible, no login required. Having pricing that's publicly accessible. You price my project. So projects you say, oh, this is a packaging event. 20 items, 10 bidders, whatever. You can price it, run it. Credit cards level fees, so make it easy to run your first project, to demystify it, and then that becomes the I suppose the evidence that a company needs that this is a better way to do things.
It's kind of a proof of concept.
So it's almost like taking talking about B2C software and people having software it's put in their hands, it's easy to use, it's very affordable, and trying it out, and if they like it, they'll use it again. It's the same concept, only enterprise sector. Right. So, and it's the avoidance of that expensive enterprise sales-led process that takes months and years, and instead just do a quick project,
test it out, see if you like it,
and it's cheaper for everybody.
This feels like it's just the beginning in terms of AI and how the technology itself, whether it evolves or whether it becomes that people are more interested in it. I'm sure that new technology will be built upon it, but I'm always thinking about how does it evolve and what impact does that have on the roles within procurement, what we do in procurement, and how it allows us to be smarter or to dedicate our time to more value-added activities. Is the end game that sourcing itself is actually fully automated, that we don't really need as individuals, as humans, to do that much, and technology will essentially run the entire process for us?
In a word, yes. That is the end game, right? Because we see best practice very frequently. Most of the customers we engage with, they tend to be exponents of best practice because they know sourcing optimization already. They know what the trademarks of a best in class process are in various categories, and there's similarities across all of them, right? So essentially, what we see unfolding in the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to be quite fast, is automation of mechanism design. We're already automating parts of the bid sheet design and automating post-publication execution of multi-round RFQs. So there's about 7 stages in the sourcing process. 2 out of the 7 now are automated. So once you get to all 7 out of 7, you're pretty much at a stage where you have a button in your ERP system saying, run my MRO bid, and exports all of the demand data into sourcing tool. The sourcing tool decides, this is an MRO event. This is who you invited last year. We'll invite those, but we've gathered data from another third-party provider that this is a new vendor in town. Let's invite them also. And we've heard from Dun & Bradstreet that this vendor is out of the market, so it'll automatically rule out one, and then it moves forward. And at each stage, it will ask the user or somebody who's overseeing this, are you okay with this? Does this all make sense? And you approve, disapprove. But it will be taking actions autonomously, and then it will be proceeding to, okay, so this is an MRO event, this is the total spend, this is the appropriate strategy to leverage your spend. If it's small, then you may not have a need for multiple rounds of bidding, but if it's a big volume, it's attractive for the market, then you might want a more aggressive strategy. And the parameters in terms of the feedback that goes in between rounds and so on, there's quite sensible norms for each category, so it's very automatable.
Right.
And you can publish the event and then receive the bids, all the scenarios, suggested scenarios for calculation are pre-populated and computed for you. And then you can also, so this is where there will always be a human factor, right, in the selection of what are the trade-offs between cost and non-cost objectives.
Yeah.
So what's your risk management policy? So it's formulation of that trade-off between the outcomes in various scenarios and the qualitative factors. Some years you may prioritize costs over value, and that's, I suppose, that's the prerogative of the organisation itself. Whether it wants to be short-sighted or long-sighted.
Yeah, they maybe feel that every single player in the market is exactly the same and can provide exactly the same service, and so it's purely 100% on cost.
Yeah,
I guess it's easier for the for software to make the decision as well, because that's a parameter is solely a cost-based decision.
Yeah.
But when it's a value-based decision or even a total cost, then that's something where there's the human element required.
So what we would say is that the centres of excellence in sourcing organisations will be strengthened in both in quality and number. Right? So the centre of excellence becomes the guiding light for, I suppose, AI that will be subservient to the centre of excellence and will do what it's told and will work to what policies it's governed by.
Yeah.
So that's the AI becomes the system that does what it's told to do, really, and will continuously learn. So there's an important factor in AI, and one of the reasons why it will also take hold is that it retains institutional knowledge. So what we've seen is that some enterprises have excelled at best-in-class techniques and processes, but lost some key personnel, and standards dropped. Yeah. And they left to a competitor, and the competitor's standards increased.
Yeah.
So, from an organization's perspective, it's important to retain the institutional knowledge. So if you've learned what best practice is, the AI will retain that and it will be loyal.
Yeah. So your knowledge base becomes your IP then, and doesn't walk out the door with you.
So you enjoy what we call anti-fragility. You're always getting stronger, and you're always learning from past mistakes and what worked well in the past, so that you continuously strengthen your approach.
Yeah.
So that's, in the long term, that's actually one of the biggest benefits. It's not one that's spoken of much, but when you look at a multi-year horizon and I suppose the turnover of staff and procurement teams, it's critically important.
So what happens then when you get to you look at the other side of the equation, so the sell side, and your service providers are using technology like this to optimize how they respond to a bid. At that point, is it a clash of the machines, or do you end up with perfect data?
It's clash of the machines, right? So this is another body of work this is very early stage. It's what we call bidder robotics. So it's automation of bidding. So in effect, bidders are, if you look at the problem from their perspective, they're presented with all these RFQs and they're all Excel spreadsheets, and they have a team of personnel that tend to be hit hard at certain times of the year, and they're overloaded, and they can't even respond to many of them. So stage one of automation of bidding responses is provide bids to this customer that are very similar to the last bids in yesterday's event. Yeah. So if you take an ocean freight event, it's okay, find the lanes, find the prices we bid yesterday, and copy and paste them so fast as possible. Just do that. If they could just do that much.
Automate as much as the response as possible.
So that requires a degree of AI and kind of pattern recognition and understanding what lane is what lane, and doing auto mapping and all that. But then the next stage is more interesting. It's around optimization of margins, right? So this is where if you look at what the sales excellence teams are doing in the bid side, the very best organizations would have stochastic models around expectations on oil prices and various commodities and so on, and would be optimizing and engaging in futures markets for buying some of these key ingredients in the products they might be manufacturing and so on. So a little like the algorithmic trading floors in investment banks, and the way the traders were displaced by algorithms, and a small number of people who were designing and running the algorithms. Same way, bid teams will be displaced by algorithmic bidding, and capture of and communication of the economies of scale and scope. So this is, I was talking about sourcing optimization, and a key element in high performance teams on the procurement side is capture of this economies of scale. But likewise, if you're really smart about on the sell side about how you're bidding, you'd like to describe those package bids effectively and find out and discover where the efficiencies are and communicate those, continuous movements or backhaul opportunities, or you have byproducts in the manufacture of chemicals and so on. How do you describe those and increase your margins, yet bid more competitively on the right combinations of contracts?
Yeah, so you would learn as a seller exactly what the optimum price is as you enter thinking about ocean freight again, and you have lots of lanes, and so that's maybe a category where there's a lot of information, and you get it pretty quickly as you're going through the bid processes, especially if you're doing this on an annual basis, but you're learning in real time exactly what the market is. And so you can figure out pretty quickly, okay, these are our high margin sales opportunities. We're only going to focus on that because we can optimize for this price, because we know that's a price the market can bear, and everything else we won't really worry about.
Exactly.
So you're just bidding on the stuff that makes you that's the most profitable for you as a seller.
Exactly. And you can deal with these opportunities at scale. Because very often you end up overwhelmed and you miss the best opportunities because you simply didn't get time to look at them. So it's about optimizing across a portfolio of opportunities.
It's fascinating stuff, Alan. One last question. I think this is, I always say this is the easy question, and that's if listeners are, we've piqued their interest or they're inspired to learn a little bit more, where can they find out a little bit about you, about Keelvar, and also, maybe there's somewhere that they can learn a little bit more about AI?
Sure. Yeah. So learning more about Keelvar, I guess on our website's the best place to go. We put everything. We're fairly upfront about what we do, and you can see demo videos, and we've got white papers. So if you're interested in, let's say, the automation aspects, wrapping optimization in AI, then we have a paper on sourcing robotics. That's a good white paper to start. If you're interested in AI in general, well, there's a lot of resources online. There's so many. I'm just trying to think where's the best place to go. Insight Centre in Ireland is a very large AI research lab. There's a lot of publicly available materials. There's even textbooks and so on that have been open sourced and are available there.
Great.
So we're always. I think we'll probably be doing more webinars and so on in the future, because there's clearly a lot of interest in this area. So we'll be doing more reach out.
Yeah, I think it's, and from my perspective, there's so much. You talked about hype earlier. It's really hard for us not understanding AI in its totality. What's the reality? What's marketing? What can we really expect? What's that different? What's the time frame like? What are real life use cases? Anything that we can help kind of bring to market, so people can differentiate, well, this is kind of marketing stuff that a big company is trying to sell, but it's not really anything different, versus this is really game changing. Yeah,
and I think that if you're trying to kind of decipher the hype from reality, one of the best places to start is actually at the micro level. It's how is the data stored, right? If the data is stored, let's say you have a procurement system and it's Excel spreadsheets and Word documents that are being exchanged, well, that's what AI people call a blob, right? It's a data blob. It's unstructured text. Very little you can very little inference you can really make. Natural language processing is powerful, but you could not make sufficient. You couldn't be confident in what you're doing with data of that kind. So it's not that the sheer volume of data is important. It's how well that's structured. So I suppose because we came out of an AI research lab, when we started on day one 5 years ago, every sourcing event, the bid sheet is constructed as a new table in the database. So every piece of data can be queried everything.
So the bid sheet meaning basically the scope.
Yeah. So it's the kind of scope of what you're looking for and the conditions around the offers you're receiving from the supply community. That's your understanding. That's your scalable understanding of what the market is offering in every single event, and then you can do macro level analysis from there. Where at least you have the kind of the queryable atomic units of data that can be used to do larger scale analysis and pattern detection and so on. Whereas if there's information stored in a Word document, you don't know what the conditions of the Word are, you don't know what the offers are, you just don't know what's going on.
It's about structuring, getting structured data and using structured
it's
data.
all about having rigor around how the data is structured and collected at the point of interaction with the supply base, so that everything is captured and structured.
Yeah.
So if you interrogate your vendors around how is this stored, and how do you ensure avoidance of these unstructured Excel and Word documents? That's really what you want. If you have valuable data in there, it's lost, really. As you move from project to project, you can't do any machine learning across anything that's in those.
Because the data doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there's the
information or text, whatever it may be.
Exactly, yeah. It's just it's completely unstructured.
Yeah. Well, Alan, thank you very much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to include links to Keelvar and to and I didn't write the name of it down, but I'm going to look back in the transcript of where folks should go to find out a little bit more about AI. I'm going to include those in the show notes. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/Alan Holland. That's artofprocurement.com/Alan Holland. One last time, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.